Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 3, Day 6. Today's journal, I'd like for you to describe in detail the differences between the Federalists, the Democratic Republicans, and tell me some examples of both parties' positions on the XYZ affair, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Now, today we're going to be talking about the election of 1800. And this is a big watershed moment in the United States because we have three candidates: Thomas Jefferson, who is a Democratic Republican, Aaron Burr, who is also a Democratic Republican, and John Adams, who is a Federalist. Now, when Jefferson and Aaron Burr get done, they had both actually tied for the number of electoral votes that they had received during the election. And they both had received more than John Adams, but they had ended up in a tie. And so what's going to happen is this is going to lead to a runoff in the House of Representatives. All right, each of them had 73 electoral votes, and Jefferson is going to end up winning in the House. Now, one of the big reasons that he is able to win in the House is because it was controlled by the Federalists, and they were led by Alexander Hamilton. If you remember, Alexander Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury when Jefferson was Secretary of State. They didn't particularly like each other, in every or agree with each other in every category, but Alexander Hamilton liked Jefferson quite a bit more. He hated Burr much more than Jefferson and swayed the vote towards Jefferson. Now, this is going to lead to a duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Burr was Jefferson's vice president at the time, and he had agreed to take that position because if you finished second in the election at this point in time, you became vice president. That's how it had worked with Washington, and that's how it worked with Adams. Now, while VP, Aaron Burr duels Alexander Hamilton, and he kills Hamilton in a duel. And he's so afraid that he's going to be arrested that he flees to South Carolina for a time, but eventually returns to Washington to finish his term as VP. Once it is over, though, however, he does flee to the west to Spanish-held territory. All right, Aaron Burr was very afraid that at some point legal action would be taken against him, and obviously killing a United States member of Congress, that's probably not going to look very good for the president. All right, now, we call it the Revolution of 1800 for a couple reasons. Number one is there was a political power in office in John Adams and the Federalists. But now we're going to have this complete change in political power to a completely different party, a completely different belief, and when this different party comes to power, people just accepted it. They were like, okay, these are the leaders of our country now. This is who the country has spoken and voted for. It's very interesting when you think about how we've got the election coming up in 2020, and then you think about, you think about the election of 2020, and you think about how much backbiting and things that you see, how that could be applied to today's voting, and even into 2024 and 2028, and we get to those elections. It's interesting that people fight the power-changing parties more so than they did in 1800, right after a revolution, not 20 years earlier. Now, as far as voting in 1800, it's very interesting because it's a very small amount of people who could vote. You had to be a free man, you had to be white, you had to be of 21 years or older, male, and you had to own land. That's going to exclude a large portion of people in our country during this time period. I know a lot of people think, well, all white people voted, early in the formation of the country. Actually, no. There's quite a few people that don't own land. Okay, there's quite a few people who were, they were very poor and still struggling and just trying to make ends meet at this point. Now, the Federalists were weakened as a result of the election of 1800, and the 12th Amendment would finally be put into place, calling for separate election of VP and president after the Burr-Jefferson problem. And essentially what happens is they're going to put the 12th Amendment into place where a president will choose his VP, and that VP will run alongside him. Not, we've got three candidates who are running for president. Okay, this one got the second most votes, so we're going to put him as the vice president. And in theory, it made sense why they did that, but as far as trying to run a country, it just didn't work because the vice president, number one, the role of the vice president was not very well known, and the position of the vice president was not very well respected. But then on top of that, now you add in the issue of them being in a completely different party. It's just a lot of problem there. The Federalists were losing touch with the common people, and that's what the view that many people in the country had, is that the Democratic Republicans pushed more towards farmers and landowners and normal everyday country folk who were, just out in the country living off the land on the frontier. They represented all those people, not just these people in these smaller or well, not smaller, but these cities that are starting to form, and the people there in Washington. They're not just backing those people. It also is kind of the same idea that people were afraid of the Federalists, that they were going to turn to some kind of monarchy. And many of the frontier people just supported the Democratic Republicans. Think back to the Whiskey Rebellion. They rebelled and tried to rob the the weapons depot. They tried to steal weapons because they were afraid that the government was going to start, enforcing their will and acting just like what Britain had. In 1801, before John Adams left office, so he's getting ready to leave office, and he writes this act known as the Judiciary Act of 1801, and it was to create new judgeships, and Adams filled those all with Federalists. So essentially what he was trying to do is pass this law, get a bunch of Federalist judges and people who would be in control and in power who supported the Federalist cause, and then he would step down as president, which is a little bit shady. It goes back to very similar to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you guys know anything about what's going on with the Supreme Court, the Republicans are trying to put in a Supreme Court justice who is a Republican because they are afraid of the Democrats being able to put in who they want, because they want someone who's going to align at least partially or mostly with what they're going to support. It's the same thing in 1801. We're seeing the same thing with a political party trying to push their agenda. Now, with that said, Adams is going to stay up all night, right up until midnight, before he leaves, filling these judgeships, and they come to be known as the Midnight Judges. And they were given to the judges. The name was given to the judges that Adams created. And Jefferson didn't like it. Just like if in 2020, if Mike Pence wins the election, and if you're hearing this lecture and it's 2021 now or later, and Mike Pence won the election or whatever happened. If a party doesn't win the election, obviously the party coming in the next year doesn't want this to happen, because they want their party to have say-so in having the ability to fulfill it. Now, and I'll get back to the point I was making there in a second, but first, talking about Marbury versus Madison. 1803, after Jefferson has come to power, Jefferson's going to refuse to give the charges through his Secretary of State, Madison. Madison won't deliver the appointment of a judgeship to William Marbury, who is a Federalist. And Marbury is going to ask the Supreme Court to make a ruling on this, saying that, this has been written by a president. He put it in charge or in order, while he was president. Why am I not receiving my judgeship? John Marshall, who is the Supreme Court justice at the time, is forced to make a decision. And, he had to make a decision. Is he going to support the Federalists? Is he, what's the deal here? Like, what is the Supreme Court's role in government? And that's kind of where we're at here, is because the Supreme Court hasn't made a big ruling yet. And so, eventually, Marbury versus Madison is going to establish this concept of judicial review, that, the Supreme Court becomes basically the referees. All right, you've got the legislators who they, make laws, and you can see there on the right the picture. And you've got the executives who they enforce the laws and they try to veto bills when they feel like they're not good. But if a law gets passed by Congress, which they can do, and it's unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court has the right to review that. And that's what they did here, is they declared the Midnight Judge law unconstitutional. However, Jefferson is going to actually leave many of those people in power. And that's one of the things that I missed right there at the bottom. Jefferson, even though he was against many of these Federalist judges being put into place so hastily, he actually supported, balance in government. That's one of the things that I respect a lot about our founding fathers in some ways, is that they at least understood, different point of views weren't always a bad thing. Even though I'm sure Jefferson would have loved to put Democratic Republicans in there, he realized that some of the men that Adams had actually put into place were good people. So make sure you answer your questions. We got 3 of them today. And make sure you get your 3 vocabulary words down. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.